So now let's talk about the two ways that you're going to be interacting with the SQLite database. So basically how you are going to be creating records in the database and then interacting with those records. The first way is through the SQLite shell. So you'll notice with a lot of technology products that they have a shell where you can interact with that product directly, even if that's not quite how you normally do it. I've shown you this before with the Python shell, right? So if you simply type Python 3, nothing else, it will drop you into the Python shell, and then you're about to have a miserable day if you don't know what you're doing, right? But basically what that allows you to do is it allows you to interact with that Python 3 environment directly without having to write out an individual script and be able to call the script. Again, when we think about a shell, you may think about the Linux shell, right? The born again shell, the bash shell, where you can go to the command line and you can type in ls space -l to list files, that type of thing. Well, the important thing to understand with all of these database servers, including SQLite, is they have a shell. So you can actually drop into that shell and you can interact directly with the database using the SQL statements that I'm going to teach you in this series of classes and whatever specific commands that particular database server has for, again, administrative and maintenance tasks. Well, the other way to interact with SQLite or any other database system is going to be through your back-end programming language. So again, here at Silicon Dojo, we use Python, so that's what I'm going to be teaching you here. And I'm going to show you a brief example of how you can use Python to both insert data into a database and then also be able to pull out that data and be able to create an HTML report with it. So first things first, let's look at the SQLite shell. So basically what I can do is I can simply run the SQLite 3 command. So this is the shell that is going to get you into the database. Don't just do SQLite, make sure you put 3 at the end, and we're going to do space, and then we're going to say what database that we're connecting to. Now this is just a name. The extension over here does not actually matter. So if you created a database without that extension, nobody cares, right? You could just simply have example, that's it. Why we put that extension there is for us to tell us what the hell the file is. Right, so basically anyway, what we're doing here is we're doing SQLite space and then the database file that we're going to be connecting to. If we go over and we take a look at my desktop, you can see over here, there is an example.db. This is that database file that we are going to be communicating with. Now it is important to understand with the SQLite world, again, one of the things that can get you into trouble is if all you do is SQLite 3, you don't put a database name at the end of it, you will then go into a temporary database. So it will create a database for you and you'll be able to interact with that database. You can create tables and interact with the tables and insert records and do all that kind of stuff. Here's the deal. If you do not save that temporary database that you've created and you exit out of it, it is all gone. So make sure to try to go into a database. The other thing too is you may ask, well, how do you create a database? Again, that's one thing to be thinking about. If you're thinking about MySQL or MariaDB or Postgres, there's this whole process for how you create a database. One of the great things about SQLite, one of the reasons that we teach it here at Silicon Dojo, is literally you create a database by calling it. So if you do SQLite space and then the name of the database, it will look for that database wherever you're at. So I'm in my desktop folder right now. It will look for this database name there. If it's not there, it will create it, and then basically you go through, you insert your records, and then you don't have to worry about saving or any of that. Simply by calling the name, that automatically will create the database, and then when you insert records, again, there's no additional save process or anything like that. Why you do have to be careful, especially as a new person, is if you're not in the place that you think you are, right? So you think this database file is on your desktop, but you're not actually on your desktop. Maybe you're in your root folder, or maybe you copy, you cut and pasted the database, file somewhere else. Again, one of the things that you can run into is if SQLite looks for this database file, doesn't find it, it then will automatically create it, and then you're going to be scratching your head when you try to look for tables and try to do something, and you're like, where did all my tables go? Don't worry, your tables are fine. They're just on a different database. wherever the hell you put it. So again, one of those things to be careful. So SQLite space and the name of the database, then you hit enter. Again, it's going to tell you that you're in SQLite, so this is going to tell you. And here is again where we look at our command prompt, and so we're going to see SQLite and then this thing, and this tells us we are in the SQLite shell. The important thing to understand, the most important thing to understand is how to get out of it. You do .exit and you exit out of it. That is going to be the most important thing. Right? But anyways, let's go back in there. And then once you're in here, just to kind of show you how you interact with it, if I want to see the tables. So I'm coming in here and I'm trying to figure out what tables I previously created. And now for SQLite, this is a command to the database server. This is not structured query language. This is a command to SQLite. So you use period tables. So you saw that with exit. Period exit, period tables, period schema, period backup, period something. That is a command to the database server, and this is going to tell us what our tables are. So in this particular database, we have a table called people, a table called roster, and a table called student. Now if we're sitting there, we're like, I wonder what those tables are. What I can do is I can do period schema. Right? We talked about schemas before. This is the design of the database for a relational database system. Period schema, and basically I can hit enter, and this will show us how these particular tables were created. Create table people, name and age, create table student, name and sex, semicolon. So these were SQL statements that created those tables. So they have a semicolon at the end. And then create table roster, name, age, and sex. So this is the way I can see what tables there are. Maybe I just forgot the name of the tables. Is it plural? Is it singular? That's a big issue. And then schema shows me what's going on here. Then if I want to see what records are here, so let's say in people, right? I'm looking at this, I'm saying, in people, what records are there? I can do select, and this is all, so this is all columns. It'll be name and age from people, semicolon, because you always got to put that semicolon at the end. And then you hit enter, and it'll show you Tim is 23, Sue is 44, Pat is 33, another Sue is 88, and Tommy is 33. Again, the important thing to understand here is if we do, let's say we do the select all from people, but we forget the semicolon, because that's really easy to do. What I want to show you is if I hit enter, I'm going to get this. I'm like, and then I do exit. Okay, I'm done with this. I want to do exit. Well, that's not doing anything either, right? And the reason is we have not finished the SQL statement. By doing the semicolon, that is what will fire off the SQL statement, and then we get an error because it doesn't know what the hell we're talking about, and we get back here. So this is what you get if you do not put the semicolon in there. Make sure to always put the semicolon, and again, as I say, the most important thing whenever you get into any shell, whether it's Linux, whether it's Python, or whether it's SQLite, is always make sure to know to get out. So with SQLite, it's period exit, and that will get you back to your normal command prompt, your normal terminal prompt in whatever operating system that you're dealing with. Now let's give you an idea of how Python is able to interact with that SQLite database server so that we're able to add records to the database server, and then we're able to pull those records and be able to create an HTML report that we're able to open up with our whatever browser that we're using to see what records are in that particular database, in that particular table. So we're looking at Python because again, we always just use Python here. The first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to import SQLite 3. Again, make sure you put 3 at the end. This is a module that should be in your default modules packages when you install Python, so you do not have to use pip or anything to install that. Then here, basically what we're going to do is we're going to connect to the database. So this will either connect to the database if it exists, or it will create it, right? And we're going to talk about this in a different class, so don't worry about this too much. I just want to give you the overview of how this works. And so we're going to say connection, C-O-N-N, we're creating that as a variable, equals SQLite 3 connect to the example.db. And so this is going to be in the working directory. Whatever working directory you're in, this is where that is going to need to be located. Cursor equals connect con that we created dot cursor. This is basically how we're actually able to communicate with the database server. Again, we'll talk about that later. And then we can do cursor dot execute. So basically what we're going to be doing is this is going to be executing a SQL statement against the database server. One of the cool things, again, with SQLite, what I like about it is we have this statement, create table if not exists. So again, this can be very useful for you if you want to use SQLite just as a record store for you're going to be creating a pretty simple project. Let's say you're going to be doing pings. You just want to continuously do pings to see what's going on with the network or whatever. You don't need records from a month ago or even yesterday. You just want to be able to run this while you are at a client site, see what's going on, and be able to create some reports or that type of thing. What's great about this is by calling this, it'll automatically create the database for you. And if the table does not exist in the database, it will automatically create the table for you. So when you go through, if you delete the table, the database, all that kind of stuff, basically this will recreate it for you. So create table if not exists. And so we're going to create a table called people with the columns of name and age. Now this may be the first time you start to notice something, if you actually understand anything about SQL structured query language, is you're like, that seems pretty simple. Wait, Eli, where's your primary key, Eli? Eli, where are your data types? Oh, who needs that when you're using SQLite? Again, one of the things I love about SQLite, you don't have to create any of that. Again, we'll talk about that later. You can literally create the table with the column names, and as long as you know what you're doing. As long as you know not to do something stupid with your code, that's literally all you have to do there. Anyways, then we do con commit. So that connection that we got created, what we're going to do here is we are going to commit whatever SQL statements that we ran. This is an important thing. If you don't do a commit, it doesn't actually happen. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just simply close the connection here, and this is basically the process. So again, we're going to be connecting to the database, we're going to be creating the table, we're going to be committing that change, and then we're going to be closing that connection. Then what we have down here is we have a while true loop. So I'm just going to loop through so we can add a number of different records. Name is going to equal input, the input function, and we're going to ask for a name. Age is going to equal the input function, and we're going to ask for an age. We're going to add a name, age, name, age, name, age. All right? Connection equals, that same thing. Connect to example.db. Cursor equals the connect to the cursor, and then execute. You will notice, if you know Python, you notice we don't have like a try except statement here. Again, we're keeping this really simple. If you were doing this in a production environment, you would put a try except statement here. I don't want to make it more complicated than it is. So anyways, we're just assuming that you'll be able to connect and there's no issues, right? So anyways, we're going to then do cursor.execute. Again, this is a SQL statement. Insert into people, name and age, values, and then you put question mark, question mark. And so why you do this is then you add the actual variable values later. So name goes to first question mark, age goes to second question mark, and this is a way to keep things like injection attacks from happening. So this is how you would insert the data using Python. Again, we're going to commit, and then we're going to close, right? Then we're going to come down here, and so every time we do this, I'm just kind of opening this up again. This is probably not the best way to do it. Again, example, we're going to create the cursor, then we're going to execute select all from people. Rows equal cursor dot fetch all. So the execute, we're doing a select statement, so we're going to select everything from people, and then basically we're going to turn that into basically a list or a set that's going to be set for rows, and then we're going to close that connection. So we now have rows, right? And then we can come down here with open. So we're going to open report.htm. So this is W overwrite. It will either be created or it'll be overwritten as file. File.write, we're going to do open with a table, HTML table tag, for person in rows, file.write, and then we're going to do table row. So this opens up table row, closes table row. Each cell in the table row. We're doing the F string here. So person at index 0, so that will be name, and then close. Person at index 1, that will be age, and then we'll close. And at the end of this, we'll close out the entire table. Right, so basically all we have to do here is if we run this, right, as you can see here, it is asking me for a name. So I can say, oh, I don't know, Sunny. What age is Sunny? We're going to say Sunny is 13. It's going to ask me for a name again because we can just keep going through. And then I say Phil, age of 55. And I don't know, Tommy. Age of, I don't know, 12, right? And this is going to keep going. This is going to keep going. But the important thing is, right, every time it loops through, it's going to create this report.html. So I can go to my desktop, because that is my working directory. I have report.html up there. I can double click on it. And then if I enlarge this, you can see, again, this is in Safari. So Safari is the browser that I use. We can see Tim is 23, Sue is 44, Pat's 33, Phil is 55, and Tommy is 12. So that gives you a very basic idea of how Python will be interacting with your SQL database. Again, I kind of created that example just so you can see the code blocks to grasp how that works. From a real world perspective, I put a lot of additional code in there that wouldn't need to be there. Again, if you understand SQLite and Python, don't necessarily write it that way in the real world, but I just want to give you that example of how you can use Python to create the database, to create the table, to insert data into the table within the database, and then be able to do a select, to be able to pull the records out and then actually do something practical with those records that have come out. So that gives you an overview for interacting with SQLite, and basically, again, what the rest of these classes are going to be about is teaching you the SQL statements, the structured query language statements, so you can create records, update records, create tables, those types of things. And then at the end of this series, I'm going to show you how to be able to use Python to then be able to connect to your database to be able to send those SQL statements so that you can actually do something pretty useful.